area called ethics. And this program was necessitated by the need for a holistic effort in the fight against corruption. Now, in spite of all the efforts by the government at fighting corruption in Nigeria, gaps still exist, as has been revealed by a recent scoping survey by the Technical Unit on Governance and Anti-Corruption Reforms, known as TUGAR. Now, one of the major reasons for this has been attributed to the absence of a strong focus on strengthening ethics and low awareness on the importance of ethics in the fight against corruption. Also, poor and failing professional standards, poor leadership at different levels, indiscipline and poor workplace practices pose a big challenge to improving the system integrity, are also contributors to the need for the ethics program. Now, in the studio to discuss ethics and its relevance in the fight against corruption, Nkemdili Ilo, who is the CEO of the PPDC. We're glad to have you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Swat.
Thank you for coming. Also, we are joined by Jane Onwumere, who is the Assistant Director of TUGAR. Good morning to you, Jane.
Oh, thank you.
And just to remind you, TUGAR actually, once again, Technical Unit on Governance and Anti-Corruption Reforms, right?
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so let's begin with you, Jane. So, can you briefly tell us who TUGAR is and what it does?
Thank you once again. We're glad to be here at this event, at this program. Briefly, TUGAR is the Technical Unit on Governance and Anti-Corruption Reforms. It is a research, monitoring and evaluation unit set up to provide data-based coordination in the area of anti-corruption and related governance initiatives. TUGAR serves as a one-stop shop for data, information, and then for monitoring and evaluating anti-corruption and governance initiatives across all sectors in the country. TUGAR has the mandate to analyze policies, provide advice, and make country-specific diagnostics on corruption and related governance issues. I think probably in brief also I'd like to let you know some of the things we've been doing. We've carried out several surveys, of which we have several knowledge products which we've produced. We also have baseline data on anti-corruption and related governance initiatives at the federal level and also in the 36 states of the Federation, focusing on the public finance management systems. TUGAR also has a mandate that has to do with cooperation, collaboration, and ensuring there's a platform for anti-corruption agencies. Based on this, we sit as the Secretariat to the Interagency Task Team of anti-corruption agencies. These include the core anti-corruption agencies and regulatory agencies whose mandates fall within the provisions of the articles of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We also sit as the Secretariat to other committees to ensure this cooperation and collaboration between these government agencies, such as the M&E Committee on the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which was adopted in July, 2017. As well as the Secretariat to the Review of Nigeria's implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Nigeria has gone through 2 cycles of the review, with the first review cycle focusing on criminalization and international cooperation, while the second cycle, which just was concluded in May this year, was focused on prevention and asset recovery. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have produced several knowledge products, one of which is the scoping survey and gap analysis of the ethics framework in Nigeria, which we're here to discuss today.
So let's just go straight into that one. What did the survey throw up at the end of your survey? What did we find?
Well, I think it's important to provide a rationale or the reason why the survey was necessary. Be carried out in the first place. You realize that increasingly all over the world, codes of conduct and codes of ethics are used to resolve ethical dilemmas facing professionals in practice and in business. It's used to sanction professional conduct, And then it's also used to prevent corrupt practices and ensure accountability. Based on the endemic nature of corruption, it's important that all the focus is not just on enforcement and sanctions, but we also need to begin to look at preventive measures. And this is what this survey hopes to, that's one of the things that it threw up, the need for preventive measures. That's because reviewing and strengthening the preventive and sanctions mechanisms inherent in ethical codes and codes of conduct, and then introducing such where there is none, will go a long way in enhancing efforts to combat corruption. These codes of conduct and codes of ethics will significantly boost the preventive mechanisms and provide a window for persuasive sanctions, which will complement the justice system. It's also good to note at this point that the pillars of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which was adopted by the Federal Executive Council, also have prevention and ethical reorientation as part of the pillars. So I think generally this is the reason why we felt it was important to scope the ethical framework in the country.
All right, that's quite interesting. All right, let's come back to you, Kim. How is ethics relevant to the work of the PPDC?
Thanks, Wat. So you know that through this Budeshi Radio, we've talked several times about what PPDC does.
True.
And we are focused on citizens' participation, we're focused on inclusivity, we're focused on transparent governance processes that work to deliver service delivery, because that's where we are interested in. And we've done this through access to information, we've done this through public procurement reforms, open contracting. And when TUGAR released their report, we were one of the first people to jump on it, and we looked at it and we thought about it. That, just like Jane said, that every step towards anti-corruption drive in Nigeria has been around criminalization, sanctions, and all of that. But look at one of the pillars of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy is around prevention, ethics.
Yes.
What is ethics for us? Ethics is a criteria that we use to set out how people act, and we define what is good and what is bad, and you are able to follow those criteria in making decisions.
So it's like handling the roots
Yes.
to determine what the fruits
Exactly. If we look at ethics, what's our ethical background in Nigeria? Lately, we've gone beyond naming and shaming. We've now taken things for granted. Oh, it has happened, it's done. He's not the first person to do it. We need to go back to ethical reorientation. We need to call corrupt acts at their root. By the time when we determine what is right, what is wrong, we are able to provide people with training. We're able to provide people with orientation on how to act. How do you act when this is presented to you? For example, you are a director in an organization and somebody comes to you and say, okay, I know you need this thing. I need this kickback from you because you need this. I need you to help my daughter get into college. If you're able to do that, I will facilitate this for you. All of those need to be clearly defined.
True.
And if people are aware that these are the different violations that are possible, they are able to take the necessary steps. Then you know you are working in, you are aware of what the consequences of your actions are. And with those kind of orientation, we are hoping to prevent corruption at its root rather than doing the reactive. So, and let me give an instance. If you look at most of the Nordic countries like Sweden, Denmark, they are one of those that have very few anti-corruption agencies, but they're also on a low corruption rating when you look at Transparency International reports. But countries like Kenya, India, Nigeria, we have a lot of anti-corruption agencies, but we're very high on the Corruption Perception Index. So I think that with this report that TUGAR has released, and it goes across not just even for public institutions, it also covers civil society organizations, it covers what you call it, private businesses, it covers professional bodies. So it's a holistic report that TUGAR has released, and we think that it's important that Nigeria and Nigerians begin to ask questions around ethics. What's our ethical value, and how do we begin to reorient people around ethics?
Because I think that reorientation will go a long way at probably helping us change our mindset, which is one of the major problems that we have. But we also understand that you signed an MOU with TUGAR, and there are expectations that were highlighted. Can you tell us about the what are the expected outcomes of this particular MOU that you signed?
Okay, so our MOU with TUGAR was just to formalize this process of collaboration, and we think TUGAR would be a great government agency to collaborate with because of the willingness of the management to take the necessary step forward. And one of the things we're looking at is how one of the things we do is technology and civil participation. We put information out there. So TUGAR has this report, and we want to take it a step further. Why don't we now create a ranking platform or a ranking process for government agencies around ethics? So most government agencies have ethic codes. They have codes of conduct. They are not necessarily the same thing, but sometimes code of conduct also have ethics within them. Private organizations, they also have ethics. Why don't we rank how, if you look at the TUGAR report, if you take time out to read it, you will see at the end there is a ranking of all the government agencies that have codes, that have reported ethics violations, that have reported ethics training and all of that. It's a whole process. So we want to begin to rank government institutions based on how important ethics and what they're doing around ethics within their agencies, and also for public for professional bodies, partnering professional bodies to begin to speak around ethics, their ethics code and violations. So let me use, for example, we are all service users. And I'm going beyond just public institutions, even for professional bodies. So we go to the hospital and there is a situation we are not aware of. How do we report a misconduct by maybe a doctor or a nurse? But we have an association that is responsible for nurses. We have an association that is responsible for doctors. How do we connect people to those feedback mechanisms to those agents, to those professional bodies? That's one of what we're going to be working on with TUGAR. How do we also educate people? Because we have a God Day attitude, or God will take care of it, and we rant. But there are also redress mechanisms, and people sometimes are not aware of the redress mechanisms, or they're not even aware of their rights. And we think that people, so for example, you have the engineers, a whole body around engineers. How many people are aware that if an engineer violates, there are certain codes of conduct an engineer should not violate, and if he violates that or she violates that, who can you report to? What the redress mechanism is, how long it will take? The same thing, for example, with lawyers. We have issues around that, and that's one of the things we're going to be working with TUGAR on, sharing these knowledge products that TUGAR has created around ethics, getting people more informed, partner with TUGAR to partner with the professional bodies to be more aware of their responsibilities to citizens of Nigeria, to people that use the services and that their associations regulate. So that's those are the outcomes of the MOU.
Okay, so citizens' participation, very important in whatever methods we try to employ for us to be able to improve on the openness of governance, on service delivery and everything. How do you intend to leverage citizens' participation in this very, very laudable dream that we have? Anybody can take this one. Maybe we go with you.
Okay. I think for us, one very important aspect of the work of TUGAR is working not just with state actors but non-state actors as well. If you look at the survey itself, it considered private business associations, informal associations, professional bodies, NGOs, public agencies, and then the private business entities. The survey actually has recommendations it has brought about, and part of these also talks about awareness creation within all these actors. We need to bring them all together to work with them to ensure that we are able to get ethics, the ethical standards working within the various sectors. I think one thing that it would be good to highlight at this point is just a few of the outcomes of the report, which we are yet to talk about, and this would give you an understanding of where we're heading to or proceeding. Just as I mentioned, these 6 categories of the sectors were looked into in conducting this survey, and the criteria used for it were looking at preventive measures, what's the tone at the top, also the issue of management framework, how well do you infuse these ethics in the day-to-day activities within these sectors. There's the issue of control and enforcement, and then periodic and regular reviews. But some of the things this survey threw up was the fact that no single framework which was scoped had all these 4 important parameters for of the evaluation. We also realized that when you talk about the public sector, for instance, most of them rely on the code of conduct for public officers, which has a strength. It is embedded in the Constitution, but that strength sometimes is a weakness. That's because it makes it very difficult to make amendments and changes to, adapt to emerging, realities and trends. That's because it will need a constitutional reform. Beyond that also, there's also the issue of lack of awareness or low awareness. This is also evidenced by some of our findings. We actually scoped 181 different organizations, but we realized that only 23 organizations out of these 123 published their codes of conduct on the website.
Wow.
That's the first issue. And then we also noticed that out of the, this 181, 154 didn't publish it on their website, and 4 had problems with their links, even though they said they had published them on the websites. When you come to the public agencies themselves, only 7 had their codes of conduct or codes of ethics published, and 81 didn't publish. So how do the people even know?
How do they have access?
How do they have access to? How do they know how to hold people accountable? Another issue again was the issue of the complaints mechanisms. There were quite a number of organizations did not have set down complaint mechanisms. In cases where there was a breach, there were issues of poor handling of reports, there was low visibility of ethics complaints redress mechanisms, and a general lack of confidence that complaints will be properly investigated and culprits punished. Out of the 181 organizations scoped, only 23 had their complaints mechanisms procedures published online. And then only 7 out of all published any outcomes on the complaint. So it shows you that, first of all, there is a challenge with the mechanism procedures. People even need to know how to proceed to make reports. And then people also need to get a feedback. This is the issue of public engagement, and I think this is one of the major issues this project seeks to address. This is one area where we will not only be working with the non-governmental organizations alone but all the partners. It is key for people to have the information. First of all, to know what the ethical standards are, and then secondly, to know how to hold people accountable, to ensure the necessary transparency and accountability that is required. Also, there is the issue of whether the codes are written. There's also the issue of whether there is regular training of staff and professionals within the association.
To refresh themselves.
Yes, to refresh themselves. When the survey report came out, it showed that out of the 181 organizations scoped, only 32 indicated introduction and induction of new staff. That's inducting new staff with these ethical codes and ethical standards. And then only 23 showed that they carried out regular training.
So what we're saying is that most people are assuming what the codes are at their places of work. They're just working based on what they find on ground.
These challenges are there, and so this is what we hope, we can work with the organizations, together with the organizations, and then create the necessary awareness. People need to know.
All right, people need to know.
Indeed.
That is a good note to drop that
Sorry,
comment. You were going to add
Yeah,
something?
and just to add that, we've just highlighted a few
Yes.
of the outcomes of the report. I think you can actually get the full report on the TUGAR website, which is www.tugar.org.ng. That's www.tugar.org.ng.
Okay. So one quick question before we open up the lines, because we have constraints as to timing, is how do you actually get to the professional bodies, which you mentioned in the course of your, trying to elaborate the citizens' participation? How do you get them to comply with the ethical codes and standards? Just maybe very briefly before we hear people. Kim, you want to come in at this point?
How do we get them to comply?
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say how do we get them to comply. I would say how do we get people to be aware of the ethical codes?
Okay.
Because I think that if you get one of the recommendations of findings was that there was a need to increase public awareness on the importance of ethics in both the public and private sectors, and to improve citizens' education on how good ethical standards can aid service delivery and fight against corruption.
Indeed.
Now, if we can do that, there is a presumption that if I know that these are the ethical codes of conduct within private organizations and private businesses, and I know what the redress mechanisms are and how the feedback mechanisms can improve, and I know that when I make a complaint, this is the process it would go to, and I would get an outcome of that process. There is an implied transition that would get the private organizations to begin to do more with regards to their ethical practice, to enforce their ethical rules, to enforce their ethical their codes of conduct. Because if people are aware, if I'm aware that a lawyer has violated a term of practice, and I know that if I reach out to the professional body in charge, that steps will be taken to get me a redress, then you know that those laws or those codes will be put in practice. So we have to build this. We have to build the demand side and get the supply to meet that.
Well,
Jane wants to add.
Okay. Also, from the survey, it's obvious that several of these professional bodies are actually willing to engage the society. This report actually brings to the fore gaps. And so they are working together with them. We can also address some of these gaps. One critical issue is the need for the information to be out, just as Nkem has mentioned. And I think this discussing with them on this report has actually made a few to take steps towards ensuring that happens. Another thing that has come up is the feedback. Not only do citizens need these codes of ethics and codes of conduct to be placed out there, but there is a need for feedback on actions that have been taken. And I think quite a number of the professional bodies have taken this back, and I think we hope to, with further engagements with them, to get more feedback pushed out to the public. And I think when we have more public engagement on these issues, then I see that it would work,
better.
Much better.
At the end of the day, I mean, one of these recommendations I see on the report talking about government working with all professional bodies to encourage establishment of an easy-to-use line system or systems for verification of qualifications, systems of verification, for all forms of verification, like you said, for feedback is very, very necessary.
So the discussion this morning has been on ethics, which of course was necessitated by the need for holistic effort in the fight against corruption. And we have been, having a wonderful Nkemdili Ilo, who is the CEO of PPDC, and Jane Onwumere, Assistant Director of TUGAR, telling us all the modalities by which they would go about achieving that which was set out from the initial plan All right, so if you have questions, comments, and any thoughts you want to share with us today on Budeshi, where we open it to fix it, please do call us on 094-600-951 and 0803-1230293. Okay, please do call us if you have any area, of course, you want clarified, because the emphasis is on citizens' participation. Let's all know that, look, there are modalities, there are channels through which you can go and get a redress in case there is any need for us to have that redress. You know, like Nkem said, we are fond of venting, we're fond of shouting, crying, complaining, but we don't go through the necessary channels that would help redress that so that we can feel satisfied at the end of the day. But it's good news to know that this is up on board and everyone can jump in to the bandwagon and be a part of it. Okay, so as we wait for the calls, you were talking about the website. Can you tell us, just go through that again, so people can actually know where to go to find all this information?
Okay, the website is www.tugar.org.ng. That's www.tugar.org.ng. You'll find the full report of the scoping survey, on the ethics framework in Nigeria, as well as all our other knowledge products. Thank you.
All right. So, Nkem, do you have any final thoughts to share with us before you guys?
Oh yes, I think that as we work on strategies towards pushing for a less corrupt society, and I think, let me add that corruption here goes beyond the bribery and the corruption, the bribery and all of that. It also goes into those what we call petty things, petty malfeasance. But as we go to work towards reducing or eradicating, we need to start asking ourselves, what are our values as a society? What are our values as a profession? What are the service values we have as a country? And ask ourselves why countries in the Nordic region, like Sweden, like Denmark, have less criminalization of violations, and yet they are also low on corruption index. I think we need to become more active in how we prevent corruption rather than reactive in tackling corruption. We need to begin to also get involved with the process. We need to go beyond just, so where you feel that your rights have been violated, you need to get information on how that right can be redressed.
Sure.
So, Fortune, you mentioned that professional bodies and government need to work together to put an online platform. One of the recommendations, technology has become a facilitator, and we need to use those technological means. We need to be able to verify the professional qualifications of different people that provide us services. For example, you have medical doctors in different places. One of the things I was pointing out to my colleagues was that we have pharmacies pharmacies.
Everywhere.
Every street has a pharmacy. How many of them are verified pharmacies? Professional bodies need to put that information online so that people can check that this person is a verified professional, and this is his number. Every person is assigned a practicing number. Yes. So those information need to be there. And when people can see that and they can verify that, you also, even where there are violations, people are also able to provide feedback and write back to the professional body in charge and say, I just noticed this pharmacy here. This person is not on your list. Can you check this out? We're in the season of Big Brother. That's one of Big Brother's eyes. The fact that you have a mass of people that can provide you information, that can provide you feedback, so long as you give them the useful tools that they can do that. That's my final word.
All right, Jane.
Oh, well, Nkem has actually spoken in depth on these issues. But I think that in addition, we need to look at our own personal principles and values. It must all start from ourselves.
Sure.
And then when we move beyond our own personal space and we move on to organizations, we need to ensure not just that we have codes of conduct which spells out do's and don'ts, but we need to begin to ensure that we have codes of ethics, which are a step further, which talk about values, which talks about principles, you know, which talks about professional standards, which we must meet at each point in time. So I think as a last word, I think we need to look inwards, first of all, into our personal, you know, lives, our personal space, to ensure that we build within ourselves those principles and those values. You know, and we do not need to be policed before we do the right things.
Indeed.
And then, you know, ethical reorientation is something we cannot do without, you know, in this country right now. We need to begin to push this on and on and on. There's a need for ethics to be imbibed in the life of everyone from the cradle to the grave.
To the grave, indeed. We can't do it any better. It has to start from the cradle to the grave. Thank you so much, Nkemdili Ilo, CEO PPDC, and Jane Onwumere, Assistant Director at TUGAR. Interesting talking to you, ladies.
Lovely talking to you.
We hope to have more of this interesting, you know, collaborations, and also what people should expect from the work you're doing. And thank you, by the way, PPDC, for all the work that you have been putting out there.
Thank you very much.
All right, Budeshi comes again next week, Friday. Make it a date with us. We'll have to take a quick commercial break, and Morning Crossfire makes a return. Please stay with us.